Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email us Team Mosso at the1916company.com for purchase, pricing, and availability questions regarding this watch. Fun fact, several months before the landmark 1985 IWC Da Vinci Perpetual Calendar chronograph debuted, the first model to actually use the Kurt Klaus Perpetual Calendar was an Ingenieur. So that watch, the 9240, debuted before the 3750 in early 1985. In 1988, the second generation Ingenieur Perpetual Calendar, very similar to the first, launched as reference 3540, which is what we have right here. So this model was launched in 87 for the 88 model year, and it only ran through about 1992, so this is a scarcity. It's the first one I've encountered for sure. Now, it's a lot like the Ingenieurs of the 80s in that this one in yellow gold measures 34 millimeters in diameter, but that's only a nominal measurement. I feel it wears larger. It's 9.8 millimeters thick as I measure it, and then with a unique sort of hybrid hinged lug from lug tip to lug tip, 44.3 millimeters, and it does use a 19 millimeter strap, but you can see that's the spacing. The strap itself from IWC features a little bit of shoulder beyond the spacing, so you're either going to get an IWC strap or get one custom cut to accommodate that little bit of shoulder flare. We'll throw it on my wrist, which is 16 centimeters in circumference, and you're going to see why I think this watch wears maybe a little bit large. So technically a 34, very few 34s wear that broad across the wrist. The fact is, it's got something of a hybrid of an Ingenieur lug and the type of Vendôme hinge lug you find on the Da Vinci 3750. As a result, although it does have a decent amount of compliance and flexibility, it's still broad across the wrist. So I'm going to recommend this watch for a wrist of 14 centimeters circumference or larger, and I'd rarely recommend so large a minimum size for a watch that's nominally just 34 millimeters. So taking a quick look in profile, it is thin. At under 10 millimeters thick, it will slide easily under a dress cuff, and this is really more of a dress watch than your typical Ingenieur, so that makes sense. Getting a good look at the strap, you can see it is large, symmetrical scale, rectangular alligator. So large rectangular symmetrical scale is always a good cut of the gator, fairly expensive and premium, which this watch deserves. You can see one of the consequences of the sort of hand and glove fit of strap to lug is that we have a very integrated aesthetic, as though this Ingenieur were still on an integrated Gerald Genta style bracelet. And yes, this is technically one of the Genta generation of Ingenieurs. It's a little bit abstracted maybe from the Ingenieur SL of 1976, but this is still very much an extension of the Genta series. Now we roll down the strap, which features a shear cut edge that's lacquered for refinement. On the bottom, you can see calfskin, no crimping, no gouging. It's a brand new IWC OEM strap. It's got a sort of medium brown with a little bit of a gloss to it, and then we have this lovely vintage IWC pin buckle. And I have to say, this is only the second time after Longa that I've ever seen a brand use this retaining bar. Now, of course, IWC then and now doesn't make straps, cases, or clasps. Brogioli made this piece, but Brogioli thought enough to include that little retaining bar. So if you're like me and you're going to use the smallest hole on the strap, or maybe even punch a few smaller ones, sometimes you wind up pinning the strap down so tightly on a tiny wrist that the strap gets pinned on the pin. Well, that little retaining bar prevents the strap from sliding all the way down to the base of the pin, making it easier to extricate a tightly strapped strap. Okay, now the case. As you can see, this is quite an elaboration of Genta's vision for the Ingenieur, though this is definitely more in the Genta mold than the series that came prior. Now, the watch does feature a crown that's a screw down, not so much for extensive water resistance because it's rated 30 meters, more because this is the first appearance of the Kurt Klaus system, which means that you can quick set the perpetual calendar using the crown. So I'm going to screw the crown out now. A couple things to note. First, because this uses an ETA 2892 base, we do have hacking seconds. A little bit more on the ETA base in a moment, but I also have the quick set system for the perpetual calendar. Now you'll note that although many early versions of the Kurt Klaus system, particularly on JLC, feature only the year and the decade, this has the year, the decade, the century, and the millennium. Now, you'll note, let me just get it in quick set mode here. I can adjust the calendar system and everything moves in sync. So that was the genius of the Kurt Klaus system. You only have to make as many corrections as days the watch has been stopped. So if the watch stops for 5 days, just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Everything, the day, the date, the month, the moon phase, the year, the decade, all of that is mechanically programmed. So if you can quick set a Rolex Datejust and correct that date, you can set this perpetual calendar. Even the moon phase is coordinated, which means you don't need to look up the current phase of the moon and try to eyeball how much of a waxing or waning crescent is present. Also, take a good look there. Back then, IWC used aventurine glass for its moon phases. Now, one thing, it is a sequential and unidirectional system, so you don't want to advance past the current calendar date. Otherwise, you'll have to stop it until time catches up with you. The dial features yellow gold hands, lovely yellow gold frames for the sub-registers, yellow gold faceted indices, and this is one quirk of the example I have on hand. Now, originally these were tritium dials. This one appears to still have its original tritium hands, but the tritium dial has been replaced by a modern Luminova example. So let me show you what I mean here. Okay, initially everything is quite fierce, but the hands will fade faster than the rest of the dial. And after about a minute, the hands have dulled considerably, and the dial, well, the dial is super luminova, so it is still glowing. So tritium hands, yes. Tritium dial base, no. All of these would have been made with tritium dials, so at some point, IWC replaced this one with a luminova service replacement. All IWC parts, just a more recent dial. Now, in terms of the case, very simple. It is the Ingenieur Perpetual, and inside we have a movement that, again, is based on the ETA 2892. So this is called the 35782, and it's the Kurt Klaus programmed calendar system on top of the 2892. So it's a thin, reliable tractor movement. It's got a 42-hour power reserve, a 4 hertz beat rate. Here we have both quick set and stop seconds, and the compound movement with the module as well as the base is 37 joules. It's water resistant down to 30 meters, but here's where it really kind of flexes its Ingenieur credentials. It is still anti-magnetic, as there's still a soft iron anti-magnetic cage inside this watch to give it a greater resistance to magnetism than, say, the Da Vinci Perpetual Calendar chronograph with the same calendar system. You also have that wonderful, nostalgic, vintage IWC International Watch Co. logo. And look very carefully, you can see that there's a subtle azurage or concentric graining on each of the sub-registers. You have that concentric pattern, but it's very faint. It's there, it's just very faint. If you want something that is vintage, high mech, incredibly rare, and a kinder, gentler era of IWC, the German-speaking Swiss up in the northeast of Switzerland in Schaffhausen. This is distinctive of the kind of watch they made in the 80s entering the 90s. And you can see the much prized little fish crown is still in place, and that the lug and case profiles are very different from almost any other Ingenieur. It's an extremely unique period piece. Reach out to Team Mosso at the 1916company.com for purchase and pricing details.